Hi, welcome to the show. Taking into account this recent massive hype around AI in the media and widespread fearful opinions that promote topics from job displacement to sci-fi scenarios of AI escaping our control and so on, I have seen a tremendous need to give public space for experts who still maintain sober perspective and promote critical thinking. And Carlos is definitely one of them. He's currently leading the global practice of AI and data in one of the divisions at Amazon Web Services. And before that, he was at Meta AI, running industrial alliances with cloud providers. So he has this pragmatic yet optimistic perspective on AI that is really grounded in practicality. We'll talk about the fundamentals of creating business value with AI, the role of traditional machine learning in business today, novel applications and future potential for generative AI in public and private sectors, true risks of AI today, and more. Stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do so now, not to miss any of our updates in the future, and enjoy. So welcome to the show, Carlos.
Thanks for having me.
Would you like to make a quick introduction? What brings you into the AI world and how has been your experience so far? What amazing things have you done? Because you have a few to share.
All right. Well, I came into this field, as I like to say, through the back door. I was actually working on infrastructure for a good amount of time. That took me into storage. And then from there came a jump into big data. And from there, using machine learning in order to analyze very big data sets. So that's sort of how I got into this space that we denominate as artificial intelligence. And along the way, I have been in different companies, but always have been a member of, I guess I was a member of the big data community. I started to participate in open source projects, and this is how I got into the positions that I got into in Amazon at Meta.
Mm-hmm. So you actually started really with low level coding and working with data yourself, right?
Yeah, well, yes. My early days were actually, I was a developmental programmer. I developed products. I was a coder. And yes, my initial foray was in backup and storage systems, networking. So yeah, I used to be a plumber, heavy duty plumber. And then progressively virtualization. And from there, jumped into cloud and larger scale computing.
Mm-hmm. Great. And what are you focusing on today?
Well, mostly on implementation, on actually taking these deep learning models in particular into projects and building workflows, putting together proposals, and basically working with customers a lot on deploying and implementation of artificial intelligence applications.
Especially large scale, because I mean, deploying artificial intelligence models on a scale like with globally on AWS for specific partners, as far as I guess, right? And also in AWS and Meta. So the scale is it's pretty important to mention here, I guess, at which this deployment happens.
Yes, but they're not always large scale, right? You can actually find a lot of value in relatively small projects. As a matter of fact, if you really look at how AI gets implemented, the highest value tends to be when it is supporting very highly skilled workers, people who master their area and can catch the deficiencies that artificial intelligence has. So these are not necessarily very, very big projects. They can be small but extremely impactful. Regulatory compliance, for instance, tends to be an area where the population of users is not necessarily very large, but some of the processes that are required in fields like medicine, like energy generation, manufacturing, they're onerous. And I think that you will find that most doctors around the world today complain about the fact that they spend more time pushing paper than attending patients. This is a fact of life. The way that we manage risk today is very different from 40 years ago. And there is an entire if you will, societal machinery that makes compliance and documentation very difficult for these highly skilled workers. Therefore, this is an area where the language models are particularly efficient at helping with the productivity of these workflows and these tasks. And these are not necessarily super big projects, but they're very impactful. So there's a bit of everything.
Yeah, so there are many low-hanging fruits here, especially in jobs that are not as digitalized, I guess, as you say, for example, in a doctor's world, or I guess also where high responsibility is involved as well, where we probably do not trust. I don't know actually why. Maybe sometimes it's also a valid concern. We do not trust the machines to do this type of work. But well, we see a lot of advancements today as well, right? And how, especially as you mentioned, large language models help us in curating content and to work with text data and whatnot.
Yes, I think that this specific area, when you say low-hanging fruit, I wouldn't say that it is very, very low, by the way. It is still difficult to put these projects together. But you are correct. If whenever you have a specific task or an area of work where you have very highly skilled people, but they can be lawyers, they can be doctors, they can be engineers, and so on, and there's a lot of unstructured data. It may be digitized, but it is not structured. It is in text form or video or images. That's the kind of area where generative AI in particular can do things that is not possible to do programmatically. Now, you also used a very important word here, which is trust, right?
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence is not really intelligent. It doesn't have cognitive processes like a human mind does. We just use a statistical analysis behind it. Therefore, when you apply statistical analysis, you do not have certainty over the outcome. This is what we call non-determinism. And AI is not deterministic. And this is why you need to have quite a bit of control and supervision. You need to understand very well what are the potential outliers and potential negative outcomes that can take place when you use a model in a workflow. Therefore, if you have a very highly skilled person, a very highly skilled lawyer, for instance, or doctor, who understands that the process could yield the results and have the ability to double check, that's where you can get massive productivity gains with a risk that can be understood and assumed. But if you have a low-skilled worker interacting with an LLM, this is where the hallucinations can actually cause a problem, a serious one. And then that can induce errors in a workflow that can have serious consequences.
Right. Yeah, so you see human as also in the future, I guess, as an essential part. It's not like a machine will replace humans, it's rather a machine will assist humans. This is where the most of the potential value comes from. And obviously, if the workforce is very skilled, this multiplying factor of what technology can, what kind of progress technology can yield and how it can enhance our productivity is much higher then. So actually, in this regard, you have a very, I think, valuable experience in terms of business development using machine learning. So like creating real world business impact and value. You mentioned one is the having skilled workers in the system. What are other fundamentals of how that you follow normally? I don't know if there is one set of fundamentals like a blueprint of what has to come in place to create business value, or maybe there are some details, but I just would like to hear, what kind of principles do you follow normally creating a business value with machine learning, with AI?
Well, I mean, AI is not magical, right? And really what matters in implementations and building value for customers is to have access to good data, to good, clean data. This is really the important, the crux of the matter. People think that models and bigger models or benchmarks and so on have a lot of differentiation, and actually that is not the case. In the field, actually, what really matters is whether the customers have a good data practice, a good strategy, if they have inventoried the data, if they treat data as an internal product, then you can do a lot with AI. Then you can do a lot. But good models or big models do not in any way mitigate bad data. If you have bad data, you're going to have a really bad experience. As a matter of fact, I see a lot of POCs that do not move into production because the data pipelines are really brittle. So you can do a proof of concept as a one-off, but then if you try to implement that and you do not have very efficient data flows, then you cannot go into production. The AI application is imprecise, or it fails, or is just simply not useful or relevant to the task. So to me, it's an absolute principle that you need to take care of the data first before you consider implementing AI.
Right. Yeah, I guess this is one of the most important points. And there are some experts like Andrew Ng, who also you follow closely, who even have this data-centric approach to machine learning, right? That we should actually focus more on curating, on giving the model the right data, because it's basically this is the food that will power this brain that we train.
I was going to mention that Andrew Ng has actually seen this coming from a very long time. And he has, as you pointed out, long before we had all of this generative AI craze, Andrew Ng was actually saying we need to make AI be data driven, and he was completely right. He was not the only one, by the way, to think in that way, but certainly he has been the most pedagogical in the market. I mean, there's a lot of considerations here with regard to what does it mean to have a good data strategy and good data processes, right? This is actually quite a large field, and as a matter of fact, when you look at the way that AI is implemented, usually all of the projects involved with the treatment of the data tend to be a much bigger task than the implementation of AI itself. So having a good data repository, for instance, data catalogs, transforming data, particularly unstructured data, assigning metadata to it or transcribing it if it is audio, segmenting it, doing entity recognition. So these are tasks that have to be done before you can use AI. So there's an entire practice around building data lakes and data repositories, and then having discoverability for the end users. Oftentimes, when you build value in AI applications, it's because you're bringing together data points that are coming from different applications, different databases, sometimes in different parts of the business, or indeed external data. And when you bring those data together and you find correlations, then all of a sudden those correlations lead to new insights that can drive the creation of new products or new efficiencies in customer service. They can also, for instance, build new alliances with other companies. And there you have very rapid value generation. But it is by bringing all of this data together. This is where the real value is there. It's not in the generative models. And sometimes you don't even need generative models. You can do things with much smaller models.
Right.
At the moment we are in a bubble. We're speaking today in late April 2024, and we're in the middle of a massive bubble around generative AI. But really, machine learning models come in all shapes and sizes. And what I find is that the smaller models tend to be the ones that get deployed, not the big ones. The big ones are very expensive and they're very cumbersome to put in production. You don't need necessarily a very large model. What you're looking for is these correlations that are non-obvious and that can lead to very strong value generation for companies.
Yeah, I definitely agree so much. And also, I think my expectations when starting to work as a data scientist were, well, you learn about all the cool stuff, like all the image, like computer vision models and all the models that handle speech recognition. well, basically deep learning and neural networks. And when you actually come in into most of organizations, I think that what you will encounter is that most of the models are actually simple ones that you don't really need any neural networks. You want rather lightweight models that are proven to be very reliable and simpler and explainable. And a lot of data is tabular and not even unstructured. So
Exactly.
you don't even really need neural networks for that type of data. But yeah, we're definitely right now among this hype in terms of how much attention gets drawn to the generative AI, to the LLMs in particular. And actually, I know you have a few interesting examples of how you worked with generative AI in a few projects. Maybe you would like to share some of the projects where it was used and how you could draw value from them.
Yeah, sure. I see prioritization as being in customer support as being a relatively easy area to implement with a very high impact. So here the use case has to do just generally when you have a very large population of consumers or citizens in the case of public sector, and then you have a lot of inbound requests. These inbound requests, in many cases, is very difficult to prioritize, particularly when you have unstructured data. Let's say that you have somebody calling up an electricity company because they have a problem and they actually write a letter because they have not been able to get through to customer support. How do you process that letter, right? At the moment, this is an extremely expensive process for most companies. Just to get the letter read and prioritized and queued is several hours of work. Most of the time, these workers are not necessarily very motivated and they are relatively slow in responding. There's a lot of errors. Basically, things fall through the cracks. And this is a perfect example of an area where generative AI can help, because doing summarization and then topic extraction from these kind of documents is now relatively easy to do. And as a matter of fact, it is even possible to do fine-tuning of relatively small models based on specific topics and priorities and intents that you get from the population that you're serving. So when you get these inbound requests, if you can digitize them, transcribe them, in the case that they come by paper, then you can do that summarization and prioritization. And the reason why this is not a high risk situation is because it is already an improvement. In other words, the existing workflow is actually higher risk than using generative AI.
You mean because of human
cracks.
error, that humans who process these letters?
Yes, mistakes, or just simply demotivation.
Right.
You find this a lot in the public sector, by the way. It's just the fact that the public sector does not have the accuracy, or the people do not have the expertise necessary to process inbound citizen requests. And this is an area where the productivity improvements can be huge, and particularly to identify those situations that could be critical. Okay, so let's say that somebody contacts you because there is a serious problem with it happens to be a serious problem with electrical installation or gas, or heaven forbid somebody has an ailment and needs help and is not able to get a medical appointment or what have you. This is the sort of situations where you want that front line to be able to identify those higher priority cases in a faster manner, in an automated manner, and then ensure that those requests that are lower priority do not get in the way of handling the high priority cases. This is a very clear example, and I see a lot of implementations at the moment around the world: summarization and prioritization.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, so especially public sector, as you said, can benefit a lot from this. And yeah, I definitely see
utilities,
that happening.
I see it in banking as well. That also happens when you have inbound emails from banking customers. You can also apply the same techniques in order to prioritize the requests.
From your standpoint, So this new trend, this emerging trend in using language models to process text data. From your standpoint, how much real business transformation is there still happening thanks to traditional machine learning compared to this boom in the generative AI world?
Oh my
Because
gosh,
we only hear about the generative AI, but what about the traditional machine learning?
Oh my God, a lot. If you look at what has happened in the world in the supply chain space, okay, the disruption of due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the disruption in the Panama Canal because of the lower water levels, the Gulf region, particularly around Yemen, because of the pirate attacks. Well, not pirates, sorry, the attacks on shipping. All of that has caused massive disruption, and there's still more going on, right? Because there's also a repositioning, if you will, of trade taking place at the moment between China and the US. And Mexico. This is the other piece, right? So a lot of trade is, well, the Baltimore accident as well, right? So you have quite a lot going on here around the world that is actually causing a lot of changes to the supply chains. These are not areas that generative AI is going to bring a lot of value necessarily. These are forecasting models, actually, and forecasting models can be complemented with textual data. That is definitely, they can be enriched, but you do not need generative models in order to do forecasting and automating the supply chain. Those are different models. These are much smaller models, actually, that are more efficient and that operate much more regularly. So that would be my answer to your question. The number one example would be supply chain automation.
Right. Yeah. So, which I guess is much more massive today in terms of the monetary value and also how much impact it has on people's lives, like handling these problems, supply of food and global crises, the ones you mentioned, compared to how generative AI is being used.
Yeah, well, I am of the opinion that the implementation in the medical field is likely to have the biggest positive impact for
the medical
humanity.
Field. Yeah.
Yeah. There is a lot more that can be done, and frankly speaking, in most Western countries, the quality of medical care is on the decline. That is definitely something that you hear from people. Just the metric of how long it takes to get a medical appointment, okay, that is actually increasing across most major countries. So that is something that we need to consider carefully why this is happening. And see whether artificial intelligence can help. There appears to be a lot of use cases where AI could help with the efficiency of medical doctors, nurses, practitioners, anybody who is involved in the medical field. Also, in pharmacology, using data techniques that include graph neural networks in order to drive clinical trials and actually shorten the time period of bringing a new medicine to market. This is actually also quite an exciting field where machine learning models are playing a very big role. This is going to lead relatively quickly to personalized medicine. So based on our genes, we can have specific pharmacological molecules developed to treat ailments that we have and that are very well, for which our genes respond extremely well. Right. So these are areas where I think that we will have the biggest positive outcomes. I feel very optimistic that we will make more progress in the next 5 or 10 years in medicine than in the previous 100. Frankly, it is
Wow, okay.
it is that impactful. So I would say if you look at our well-being, that's where we should expect and demand AI to assist the most. So yeah, supply chain is definitely important, particularly for foodstuffs. No question about it. One thing that I do regret a little bit, Pablo, is that I see so much AI being used for leisure. For games, for social networks. I wish that we used it a little bit less for that and a little bit more for things that are, I think, a bigger priority for our well-being.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, in medicine, is it because of the Gen AI advancements? So now we can better handle text data, for example. So as you mentioned, writing reports, analyzing them, prioritizing them. Or is it generally because medical field so far has been understaffed in terms of technical abilities?
Yeah, that's a more complex question, right? Pharmacological, so pharma, right? If you look at life sciences specifically, they have actually invested ahead of of everybody else. For instance, the use of a core component of language models is transformers, right? Transformers is a technical concept, but basically that's it was an engineering development that was actually published originally in 2017, and that is what has led to large language models. Pharma companies have used transformers practically since 2018 or 19. They were very, very quick to leverage them. And then with those transformers, they were able to start to process and structure medical data at very large scale. So ingesting medical reports and then looking for correlations on specific symptoms, treatments from medical doctors all around the world. Particularly during COVID-19, there was a lot of sharing of information that took place, but that information was unstructured. And this is where transformers were being used in order to build basically graphs that actually showed the connections between treatments, patients, and ailments. And this is how the first biomedical graphs were built. So pharmacological companies are well ahead, very, very early implementers of deep learning. However, most of the medical care is in much smaller institutions. It's in hospitals, and as you know, in a big chunk of the world, including all of Europe, it tends to be in the public sector. And that is a completely different kettle of fish. That's where, whereas pharma companies have the ability to hire deep learning engineers and build bioinformatic teams, that capability is not necessarily available in the institutions who are actually dealing with patients on a day-to-day basis. That's, if you will, where the challenge is. How can you get medicine and socialized medicine in particular to move at the speed of new development in technology? That's the problem that we haven't cracked.
Right. Yeah. So it's mostly because of new capabilities of new technical capabilities of our models. As you mentioned, transformers came into place, which were developed by Google, and that was used, which previously could not be used on text data in medical sphere. But at the same time, it happens faster in the private sector. And of course, I mean, as usually happens, I guess, the public sector is not as efficient and as fast paced as we would like it to be. So you mentioned this is one of the opportunities for the AI to create real world impact. What are the risks or threats or challenges do you see? Generally, it's looking at the landscape of AI developments today. Yeah, globally, what kind of challenges do you foresee?
For AI specifically?
Right. So, for example, for the generative AI field, which also, even from very respected. And for me, maybe the top experts in the field, like Lex Friedman, like other podcasters who are public figures in AI, they dedicate a lot of space and discuss it a lot about the potential risks of AI. And I would just like to hear your view on that. How much of those risks are real? How much of those risks are not real? What real risks do you see?
Well, I think that mispositioning and misunderstanding the technology is a very real risk. And particularly the fact that we call it artificial intelligence, in my opinion, is something that we're going to regret because it looks like it is intelligent, right? Because you can actually have a conversation or a dialogue with it, and what it replies appears to be coherent, like a person. But actually, it is just a mathematical trick that is happening behind the scenes. And then this mathematical trick is nothing else that computing some statistical correlation value and then choosing one that you learn to deduce by examining extremely large amounts of data. So there's no intelligence here, right? And yet the majority of the population thinks that artificial intelligence is intelligent. And we have had very sharp reactions. I think that a lot of people in Europe, for instance, are very concerned about artificial intelligence taking away jobs, right? It's interesting because if you look at surveys in countries that are less economically developed, people are a lot more optimistic about the adoption of AI. It's paradoxical in a way. So the misunderstanding of the technology, in my opinion, is the biggest threat. It could lead us down the path of overregulation. That is a very real concern. It could also lead us down the path of people trying to automate when you actually shouldn't be automating. Or savage automation is what I would call it, or wild automation, where you drive an end customer or an end user crazy because you put this phalanx of chatbots, and actually these chatbots do not necessarily understand what is the intent or the objective of the customer, and you do not have a recourse to go and talk with a human. This is, in my opinion, something that has already happened. And right. I don't know if you have had any experience recently talking with your utility company or what have you, but it can be really, really difficult, almost impossible. And then when you have an aging population that is not used to having to deal with or to develop the techniques to go around the mesh of chatbots that sometimes you have in customer service centers, it's terrible because these people feel completely disempowered to go about their daily lives, whether that is dealing with their banks or their utility company, paying taxes or whatever. These are real important issues. So people who are implementing AI who do not quite understand that AI is not intelligent can actually cause more damage than gain. Although you may have a productivity benefit apparent, actually you could be driving customer support to get significantly worse, or you could even make vulnerable people even more vulnerable if you don't implement these systems correctly.
Right. So these models are not ready yet to be served to end user, to replacing human from the loop.
I definitely do not phrase it that way, Pavlo. Okay, this is not about the model. This is about the implementer. This is about the person who is responsible for defining a workflow and wants to use a machine learning model in order to improve it or to handle it. Well, and when I say improve, it could be because of financial pressure to decrease costs.
Right.
So that is where I see the risk. It is in not understanding the technology well enough and then causing problems to the end user, the consumer, or the citizen downstream.
Right. And the other risk, as you see it, is the missed opportunity, right? So because people, is that why you say so regulation is a potential threat? So we should not regulate as much because we will miss opportunities in terms of creating value?
Yeah, a question that I ask myself is, if we didn't call this artificial intelligence,
Let's give it
would
another
we
name.
have would we have an AI Act in Europe? Let's say that instead of calling this AI, this is a term that goes back, I think, to 1955. It was a summer project in Dartmouth in the United States. If instead of AI they called it, I don't know what it could be, like big data correlation or correlative science or whatever, we probably wouldn't have an AI Act.
Right.
But since we call it artificial intelligence, this has actually caused a very sharp reaction. So the AI Act is, it's an extremely well-intentioned piece of legislation with a lot of positives. No, don't get me wrong. It also introduces a lot of ambiguity that is sometimes difficult to interpret. The idea of what constitutes a high-risk application. The definitions are still rather ambiguous. So there is some jurisprudence that has to be set in order to understand clearly what those situations are going to be. So yes, there is a risk of overregulating. And another example is in the US, you actually have states, not federal level, but actually states enacting legislation that is different from state to state concerning the implementation of artificial intelligence. The Biden administration has some directives that have been issued, right? Most of them voluntary, by the way. So there is a potential fragmentation inside of the internal market of the US that could happen if the legislation is inconsistent. And evidently, if you have inconsistency in the US and in the EU, or ambiguity, the combination could make it extremely difficult for companies to develop and deploy AI-based applications.
Yeah, it's already the case in the world with the GDPR and different rules in Europe versus the US. You already have to take into account a lot of things when you deploy, even if it's not using AI in any way. Just the digital world gets. It gets regulated quite. I don't know if too rapidly or not rapidly enough. Depends on who you ask, I guess. And so,
GDPR is a fact, and GDPR has become pretty much the de facto standard around the world. That's not the case with AI. It's different. GDPR, as a matter of fact, has extraterritorial applications, as you know. In other words, if you are an EU citizen outside of the EU, that somebody is actually manipulating your data, the GDPR protects you, right?
Right.
We will see about how the AI Act can be implemented outside of the EU. The reach that GDPR has is huge, and as a matter of fact, it has become pretty much a de facto standard around the world.
Okay.
With the AI Act, I think that we still have a long ways to go.
Right. And job displacement. You said you don't see it as such a risk in terms of how many jobs will be maybe replaced. Maybe, I guess, new jobs will be created and there'll be many more, right? But do you not see this as a valid risk that is worth discussing, maybe even regulating in some way?
Yeah, it's a very important topic, right? Because we have a demographic evolution that is causing a lot of strain already in the economies, right? I think you probably have noticed that around most of the developed world, manual, like labor, anything that can be like getting a plumber, getting an electrician, and so on, is already getting difficult, right?
Yeah.
agriculture, the situation is most people now live in cities, right? I don't think that people realize the crisis that we have in agriculture with regard to getting labor for the collection, particularly fruits and vegetables, right? The cereals are highly automated already, very highly automated, but there's other areas of agriculture that are critical for our well-being, right? So these are facts of life, and the aging population is going to continue. And the fact that people do not want to have careers that are in which they use their hands is also a fact. So the need for automation is there. And if you look at countries with a very acute labor shortage, like Japan, for instance, almost any idea that can automate agriculture is welcome in that country. Right? So that's why I think Japan has always been very strong in robotics, and now they're going to become even stronger applying AI to robotics, right? So that those are, I think, that are a higher level requirement than analyzing the specific effect of AI on jobs. There's no doubt that it has an effect. There's no doubt that it has a productivity effect that can lead to job displacements. But on the other hand, I think it is something that we need to manage and we need to welcome, because we need it. We absolutely need it. Unless otherwise we are going to be a population where the pressure, for instance, on the retirement age is going to keep increasing, right? It is inexorable. And, what does that mean for our standard of living? Is that really the kind of world that we want to be in, looking at people who are 70 years old having to work?
Right. I mean, I agree with you in some sectors, like the agriculture, but also you mentioned no one really wants to work there, or a few people want to work with their hands today. They want to use their creative skills, their brain, basically, to work.
Yeah, they want to be sitting at an air-conditioned office.
Yeah, exactly. But what really happens, and what is really surprising, is that we see, actually creative jobs like writing, like creating music, potentially creating videos and images, it's done very well by AI. So it's not really the manual jobs right now that get automated so fast, because robotics kind of slacks in terms of its rapid development. So it's still hard to do robotics. It's much easier than we thought, apparently, to do creative work with AI, with robots, right? But I also get your point. So we have aging population. For instance, in the US, I think in the last decade, the increase in labor force was under 1%. So additional 1% of labor force. And it was, I think, around 5 to 10% in the decade before that. So there is definitely slowdown in terms of how many people are at work. So there'll be more demand for workers and fewer workers. So we need some automation. And yeah, I definitely agree with that point. So that's very interesting. And I also like to follow your thoughts on social media. I think you have very good insights, very pragmatical as well, and to the point. Do you recommend how people can find you on the internet, and also what kind of sources do you recommend for our listeners to consume, to read, to watch, and etc.?
Well, thank you for your kind words. LinkedIn is the platform that I use to communicate, but with all the humility and modesty of the world, the people like you mentioned Andrew Yang is definitely a person that I would recommend anybody to follow. I think Andrei Karpathy, for those of you who are more technical, right, he's got to be one of the best teachers in the world. I mean, he's just absolutely fantastic. His level of empathy, particularly with people who are learning, is just completely off the Richter scale. So watching his videos, going slowly through them, something that I would highly recommend. Then there's the YouTube channel, 3 Blue, 1 Brown. I don't remember at the moment the name of the teacher. He's also he's a giant in pedagogy, and also he invests a lot of time in providing visual help to help you understand. So the series that 3 Blue, 1 Brown has on deep learning are fantastic. Again, I highly recommend them. And also, while I say all that, also please be careful about what you read. There's a lot of people actually expressing opinions or basically connecting two places and then putting an exponential line through it and projecting things into the future that are highly speculative. They create a lot of noise. Sometimes they use fear in order to drive engagement. So I definitely recommend everybody to use critical thinking. We are at the moment in the middle of a hype bubble. So I strongly recommend checking sources and contrasting arguments that people make and ensure that those people that you follow, they really understand what they're doing and prove to you that they understand what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, that's why I think it was very important also to have you on our show, because you have, I think, a very moderate standpoint. So not thinking too much ahead in science fiction terms, but also not devaluing what's happening today. There's a lot of value in data and our professions. So yeah, thank you very much. It was a very great pleasure for me to speak with you.
Thank you, Pavlo, and very best of luck with your podcasts.